Okay, so have you ever noticed a rather fascinating quirk on the Catholic liturgical calendar? I mean, if you just glance at the month of August, there's this back to back sequence that really stands out. On August 15th, the church celebrates the Assumption of the Blessed Virgin Mary. That's honoring the belief that she was taken into heaven, body, and soul. But then, exactly 7 days later, on August 22nd, the church turns around and celebrates the Queenship of Mary. It's an incredibly quick turnaround, right? And honestly, it raises a fascinating historical and theological mystery that we are going to unpack together in this explainer. So, the absolute crucial question we have to ask here is, why a 7-day gap? Why so quickly? I mean, is the church essentially saying that Mary was assumed into heaven on the 15th, and then she had to, just sit around and wait exactly 1 week before officially becoming queen? Did she literally have to wait 7 days in heaven before getting her crown? It's a completely fair question, and the answer actually reveals an incredibly rich layer of tradition. Well, let's dive right into this. The short answer is not exactly. We can officially debunk the idea that this 7-day gap is some kind of secret, literal, biblical formula. The Catholic Church definitely doesn't teach that Mary arrived in heaven and was put in some sort of cosmic waiting room for a week. Instead, this 7-day gap is purely liturgical. It's essentially designed as a window of time for the faithful to engage in continued, really deep reflection on what the Assumption actually means, before moving on to the very next major concept. And the theological progression here actually flows beautifully. Step 1 is the Assumption, right? Celebrating Mary being taken into heavenly glory. Step 2, that entrance into heavenly glory gives everyone a moment to just pause and reflect on her exalted state, which leads us naturally to Step 3, her queenship. You see, the church places these celebrations close together because the concepts are intimately connected. Once you celebrate her entrance into heaven, your attention is quite naturally drawn to the royal dignity she holds there. It's really a progression of thought, not a strict historical timeline. Section 1. A liturgical shift. The history of the feasts. Now that we've got the theological progression down, let's actually look at the history, because believe it or not, this perfect back-to-back arrangement wasn't always the case. If we map out the historical milestones, we have to start centuries prior to the modern era. Catholics had honored Mary as a queen for many, many centuries, just as a matter of traditional belief. But it actually wasn't until 1954 that Pope Pius XII issued an encyclical called Ad Caeli Reginam. Now, it's vital to note here, Pope Pius didn't just invent Mary's queenship out of thin air in 1954. Actually, he merely formally established it as a feast day in the universal calendar. Then, following the Second Vatican Council, we see a major reform of the Roman calendar. And here is where we get our historical plot twist. When Pope Pius XII originally established the Universal Feast of Mary's Queenship back in 1954, it wasn't in August at all. It was actually placed on May 31st. It was only after the reform of the Roman calendar following Vatican II that the feast was officially moved to August 22nd. So why make that change? Well, it was highly intentional. The church specifically wanted to place the queenship right near the Assumption to really bridge the two events. The calendar was literally rearranged to emphasize the direct relationship between her heavenly glorification and her royal queenship. Pope Pius XII brilliantly illustrated the mindset behind this shift in Ad Caeli Reginam. He wrote, "Mary is queen because she is the mother of Christ and because of the unique role she received in God's plan." He is formally connecting the dots for us here. Her queenship isn't just some standalone title, right? It is intimately bound to the glory she received after being taken into heaven, and, even more importantly, it's entirely bound to her relationship with Christ. Section 2. The Queen Mother, a biblical blueprint. To truly grasp how this relationship works, we actually have to shift our focus way back in time to a very specific biblical blueprint. In the historical context of the Old Testament Davidic kingdom, royal authority was distinctly shared, but, and this is key, it wasn't shared with the king's wife, mostly because kings back then often had many wives. Instead, the most elevated, singular royal position right next to the king was held by the king's mother. She was the Queen Mother, a figure of immense influence and intercessory power in the royal court. You can actually see this exact dynamic play out in the first book of Kings, chapter 2, verse 19. It describes the moment Bathsheba approaches her son, King Solomon. The scripture says, "The king stood to meet her and paid her homage. Then he sat down on his throne and had a throne placed for the king's mother." I mean, just imagine that scene. The king himself stands up and has a literal throne brought out specifically for his mother. The theological connection here is that since Jesus is recognized as the eternal Son of David, the ultimate Davidic king, Mary is his mother. Therefore, this ancient Queen Mother tradition provides the exact biblical background for understanding why Mary is referred to as Queen. Section 3. Pointing to the King, Mary's royal status. As we transition to the ultimate theological purpose here, let's clear up a massive misconception by contrasting some common myths with the actual truth. We've already covered the first two myths, right? She didn't literally wait 7 days, it's just liturgical timing, and the queenship definitely wasn't invented in 1954, it was just formalized. But look at that third one. Some people think the title of queen implies Mary became like another god in heaven. The Church's teaching is an absolute, emphatic no to that idea. The Church teaches that Mary's queenship depends entirely on Christ. She is absolutely not a deity. We can actually break down the core logic of this teaching pretty simply. First, Jesus is the king. Second, Mary is his mother. Because of that unique, absolutely unparalleled relationship, she shares uniquely in his glory, just exactly like the Queen Mother in the Davidic kingdom. But crucially, the Church maintains that worship is reserved for God and God alone. Mary is highly honored as Queen of Heaven and Earth, for sure, but she is not worshipped. Her entire royal status is purely a reflection of her son's ultimate kingship. So the crucial takeaway here is beautifully simple. Her crown points to him. The Assumption on August 15th and the Queenship on August 22nd, they're not two disjointed, unrelated celebrations. They are literally two chapters of one continuous story. The mother who was taken into heavenly glory is honored as queen precisely because of her unique, unbreakable union with Christ the King. Every single bit of her royal dignity is meant to direct our attention straight back to him. Which leaves us with a pretty fascinating final thought to ponder. If her crown ultimately points to him, how does understanding this ancient Queen Mother tradition change the way we view the kingdom of Christ itself? I mean, does knowing the historical roots of this 7-day liturgical quirk give us a clearer picture of how royal authority and intercession were understood in the biblical world? It certainly reframes a simple calendar date into a profound window into ancient history and theology. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and hey, keep asking those great questions.